The silver thimble on the vanity was engraved with 2 words. Handle with care. I opened my eyes and they were not mine. The ceiling was wrong. The light was wrong, thinner somehow, falling through curtains I had never chosen. My hands, resting on top of a blanket the color of dried roses, belonged to someone else. Older knuckles. A thin gold band I didn't remember putting on. I knew this room, though. I knew this house. I knew, with a certainty that dropped straight through my stomach, exactly whose body I was standing in. Vivian Marlowe. The mother-in-law from the novel everyone on that reading app used to argue about at 2 in the morning. The woman readers loved to hate. I sat up slowly, testing the weight of a life that wasn't mine. A mirror across the room showed a face in its 50s, sharp cheekbones, silver threading through dark hair pulled back tight enough to ache. Vivian's face, exactly as the cover art had painted her, cold and composed and faintly disapproving even at rest. I remembered the book the way you remember a song you never chose to learn but somehow know every word of. Today was the day the story began. Today the son's new wife moved into this house. Today, according to every review I'd ever skimmed, the villain started her quiet, elegant reign of cruelty. I picked up the thimble from the vanity and turned it over in my fingers, cool and heavier than it looked. In the book, this small object appeared exactly twice. Once when Vivian snapped at a seamstress over a crooked hem. Once when the narrator described her as a woman who handled people the way she handled fabric, carefully, precisely, and only when strictly necessary. I set the thimble down harder than I meant to and told the empty room I would not become that woman. Not today. Not on page 1. What unsettled me more than the room, more than the wrong ceiling, was how little my hands hesitated reaching for it. They already knew this vanity. They already knew which drawer stuck. And somewhere beneath my own thoughts were pieces of Vivian's life that weren't mine. Memories without emotions. Names without introductions. The layout of every room in the house. The habits of the people who lived here. I hadn't only inherited her face. I had inherited enough of her world to understand exactly why everyone expected the worst from her. Breakfast was already laid when I came downstairs, the smell of coffee and toasted bread thick in the hallway. Linen tablecloth, white as a fresh bandage, stretched the length of the table. My son Oliver sat at the head of it, scrolling through his phone with the particular stillness of a man avoiding his mother's eyes on purpose. Across from him sat a young woman with red hair and a smile that stopped somewhere behind her teeth. Emma. I recognized her instantly, the way you recognize a stranger from a dream. She reached for the coffee pot before I had even pulled out my chair. Her hand shook, just slightly, just enough to be noticed by anyone watching for it. The cup tipped. Dark liquid spread across the white cloth like something opening. Emma stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor, a short, ugly sound that made the housekeeper flinch in the doorway. "Your mother already hates me," she said, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear. I hadn't said a single word. I hadn't even sat down. But every face at that table turned toward me anyway, waiting for an explanation. Waiting for an apology to a crime that hadn't happened yet and somehow already had a verdict attached. Oliver set his phone face down on the table. He didn't look at the coffee spreading toward the sugar bowl. He looked at me instead, the way he used to look at me as a boy when he wanted me to fix something without making him ask twice. His thumb found his wedding ring and turned it once, then again, a habit he'd had since he was 12 and nervous about something he couldn't put into words. "Mom, can you just say something nice to her?" he said. "Just this once. For me." I picked up a folded napkin and pressed it into the stain, watching it soak dark at the edges. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted into evidence later, folded into some future sentence that started with "Vivian said." So I said nothing. I dabbed at the coffee until my fingers were stained brown, and I let the silence sit there undefended. Defending it would have meant admitting there was something to defend against. The Whitmore charity luncheon filled the country club's east room with the smell of lilies and old money 2 weeks later. I wore navy, tailored, unremarkable. Emma wore white, which I noticed and did not mention, not even to myself for very long. Somewhere between the salad course and the auction announcements, she leaned toward the table beside ours, toward a cluster of women holding champagne flutes like they were oxygen tanks. Vivian believes daughters-in-law should earn permission to join the family, she said, and laughed like it was a joke everyone at the table was already in on. I had asked her exactly one thing weeks earlier, standing in the hallway with a grocery list in my hand. I had asked one thing. If she planned to bring guests to family dinners, she should let the housekeeper know a day in advance so there would be enough food for everyone. That was the entire conversation. 4 sentences, maybe 5. Now it lived in this ballroom as something else entirely, something with teeth. A woman named Miriam lived 2 houses down and collected other people's business the way some people collect stamps. She gave Emma a look of soft, practiced sympathy, the kind rehearsed in front of a bathroom mirror. Poor Emma, someone murmured nearby, close enough for me to catch it, far enough that answering would have looked like I was eavesdropping on my own reputation. I ate my salad in small, unhurried bites. I complimented the hostess on her centerpieces, real orchids flown in from somewhere warm. I did not correct the story. Correcting it would have required raising my voice, and raising my voice was exactly the kind of thing that would end up in someone's outline as further proof. My birthday landed on a Thursday in early September. Oliver had remembered every year since he was 7 years old. He always showed up with a cake he couldn't bake to save his life, and a candle he always lit crooked, laughing at his own bad aim. This year he called at 4 in the afternoon, his voice too fast, too rehearsed. "We've got dinner plans we can't move, Mom," he said. "Emma told me you'd rather be alone anyway. She said you don't really like fuss, that all the attention makes you uncomfortable." I had never said that to Emma. I had never said that to anyone, not once, not in 53 years. I sat alone at the kitchen table that night with a small bakery cake. One candle burned down into wax, pooling and hardening before I remembered to make a wish. The flame guttered and went out on its own, without wind, without reason. I watched the thin gray smoke curl toward the ceiling. For the first time with any real clarity, I thought this pattern was too clean, too convenient, to be a string of accidents. It was around then, passing Emma's half-open door one evening, that I saw something I wasn't meant to see. She sat cross-legged on the bed, phone propped against a pillow, video call open to a woman who shared her same red hair, softer with age. Emma's voice had none of its usual polish. "Nobody even notices when I do things right, Mom," she was saying, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "I just want one thing in my life where I'm not invisible. Just one." I stood in the hallway a moment longer than I should have, then walked on before either of us had to acknowledge I'd heard it. Whatever she was building in this house, some part of it, I understood then, had started as something almost human. That didn't make it forgivable. It only made it sadder. The washing machine broke on a Tuesday morning, flooding an inch of water across the laundry room floor. I went looking for the warranty folder in the hallway closet. It was the one room in this house that still belonged entirely to practical, unglamorous things, receipts and manuals, and the small quiet paperwork of a life being maintained. Behind a stack of old catalogs I found a tablet I didn't recognize. Not mine. Not Oliver's. He barely tolerated technology that wasn't a phone glued to his palm. I turned it over in my hands and the screen woke on its own, still logged into an open document nobody had bothered to close. A file titled Chapter Outline. Emma's name sat in the corner, small and gray, the kind of signature you leave when you never expect anyone else to look. I read 3 lines before my hands went cold enough that the tablet nearly slipped from my grip. "Cry here," one note said, beside a scene I recognized instantly as the coffee spill. "Make Oliver choose," said another, beside a scene that hadn't happened to me yet. "Turn Vivian into villain," said a third in smaller font, almost an afterthought. Readers love evil mothers. I kept scrolling and found something worse than the outline itself. Notes about Emma's own fears. About always feeling invisible. About needing people to finally choose her. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped telling a story because she loved writing. She was writing because she needed to be the person everyone felt sorry for. I sat down slowly on the closet floor, tablet balanced on my knees, and read the whole outline twice through. Every humiliation I had absorbed over the past month was listed here, planned like appointments in a calendar. The coffee. The luncheon comment. The forgotten birthday. All of it had a line item. All of it had a purpose that had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the story Emma was constructing, brick by careful brick, using my life as the mortar between them. The autosave timestamp blinked quietly in the corner of the screen. 10:42 p.m. Last night. While I slept 2 rooms away, entirely unaware I was already a character in someone else's manuscript, cast without an audition, sentenced without a trial. I scrolled further down, past the outline, into a folder labeled Research. Screenshots of forum threads where readers debated fictional mothers-in-law, ranking them by how satisfying their downfall had felt. A spreadsheet, actual columns and rows, tracking which scenes had earned the most engagement on an earlier draft she'd shared somewhere private. Beside the coffee spill scene, a note read, "This one performed well, keep the tone." Beside an entry I hadn't lived through yet, one titled The Anniversary Dinner, a note read, "Save this for Act 3. It needs a bigger audience than the luncheon had." I closed the folder slowly. My hands had stopped shaking. Somewhere between the second line and the 15th, fear had turned into something colder and more useful than grief. Talking Emma out of this story was never going to work. Proving, later, exactly what she'd written, that was the only door still open to me. I didn't confront her. Not that night, not the next morning. Something in my chest had gone very still, the way a house goes still right before weather turns. I closed the document exactly as I'd found it and slid the tablet back behind the catalogs. That same night, under a single lamp at my own kitchen table, I started building something of my own. I bought a small notebook the next morning, soft leather cover, the kind that closes with a thin elastic band. I started writing down what actually happened, in plain language, no interpretation attached. Dates. Times. Exact words, written down within the hour so my own mind couldn't soften the edges out of habit or exhaustion. I stopped deleting Emma's messages out of wounded pride and started saving everything instead. Screenshots. Dates. Exact words. The coffee stain before it disappeared into the wash. The candle stub from the birthday dinner that never happened. On my phone, I created one folder and gave it the only name that mattered. Facts. 3 weeks into this new, quiet discipline, I called Bertram Holt, an old colleague from my years consulting for family-owned businesses navigating succession. That was back when I had a career instead of a house to manage. I asked if the Ashworth Foundation still needed someone who understood how families tear themselves apart over inheritance and control. He laughed, warm and immediate, and said they'd needed someone exactly like me for 2 years and simply hadn't found the right person yet. I signed the contract alone in my study that same week, using a fountain pen filled with Mont Blanc blue ink, the same pen I used to carry into boardrooms. Nobody in the family knew. For the first time since Emma had moved in, I had something that belonged entirely to me. Something no one else could quietly rewrite behind my back. The Foundation's lawyer was a woman named Gwen Pearson, tall and unhurried, who carried a battered green thermos that had clearly survived several decades of hot coffee and colder offices. At our first meeting, she reviewed my contract line by line, pausing over clauses other lawyers would have skimmed past. "Before we sign anything," she said, tapping the paper twice with one finger, "let's verify before we judge." One afternoon in her office, I finally told her what was happening at home, still careful, still unwilling to say the whole shape of it out loud. Gwen listened without interrupting, then slid a legal pad across the table toward me. "Write down every incident you can remember," she said. "Date it. Don't interpret it, just describe it. Feelings get edited by the person retelling them, every single time, usually without meaning to." I kept that legal pad in my bag for weeks, adding every detail before memory could soften it. Back home, Emma's provocations grew sharper and more frequent, as if she could sense the ground shifting beneath a plan she still believed was fixed in place. She left dishes stacked in the sink and blamed the housekeeper by name. She rearranged the books on my study shelves and called it tidying when I asked. She brought up, twice in 1 week, how exhausted Oliver looked lately, how stressed. "Maybe it was the tension in this house wearing him down," she'd say, her eyes flicking toward me each time like she was checking whether the line had landed. I answered her in short sentences after that. "Fine," I would say. Or, "I'll look into it." Or nothing at all, just a nod, and then I would leave the room before she could build the next line out of whatever I said or didn't say. Something in her started to fray at the edges. I watched her, more than once, open her phone at the dinner table, thumb hovering over a half-written post. 3 sentences typed and then deleted, typed again and deleted again. Whatever had worked so cleanly for a full month had stopped landing the way it used to. She didn't understand why, because she didn't yet know what I knew. The Ashworth Foundation held its annual gala at the City Museum in October, under a domed glass ceiling that turned the whole room silver with borrowed moonlight. String lights wrapped the marble columns. A quartet played something slow near the east wing. Oliver came in a gray suit he hadn't worn since his own wedding. Emma came in a black dress clearly bought for exactly this kind of room, exactly this kind of lighting. Board members mingled with journalists and donors. Bertram introduced me to 3 separate people as the woman who had saved their succession plan from total collapse. For one full minute, I let myself simply enjoy being known for something true. Emma found her audience near the dessert table, a small circle of board wives and one reporter from the regional paper holding a notepad she hadn't opened yet. I heard Emma's voice rise, just enough to carry over the quartet. "You have no idea what it's like, living with a woman who decides you're the enemy before you've even unpacked your first box," she said. She touched the corner of one eye like there might be a tear worth catching on camera. I set down my glass and walked over, unhurried, the way Gwen walked into every meeting she'd ever taken me to. I did not raise my voice. I asked the small circle, and then the room at large, for permission to show one file on the projector already set up for the evening's donor presentation. Bertram, curious, nodded toward the technician standing by the equipment. I connected the tablet I had quietly copied that outline onto weeks earlier, backup after backup, timestamps verified, nothing altered, nothing added. The first slide was the chapter outline itself, Emma's name still small and gray in the corner exactly as I'd found it. The second slide was the coffee spill scene, dated, my own photograph of the stained tablecloth placed beside her outline note. "Cry here." The room's chatter died in pieces, table by table, the way a wave loses its noise as it flattens out across wet sand. The third slide showed the birthday message, screenshotted and timestamped, sitting next to the outline entry that read "Make Oliver choose." The fourth slide showed the luncheon comment about earning permission, placed directly beside my actual, recorded request about giving advance notice for dinner guests, 4 sentences, nothing more. The projector clicked as the final slide loaded, white letters glowing on a black screen. "Readers always forgive the heroine." Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass touched a table too hard and rang out once, sharp and clear, before the silence swallowed it whole again. Oliver stood very still beside the dessert table, his jaw working like he was trying to remember how words functioned in his own mouth. Miriam, 3 tables over, looked down at her plate as though the answer to all of this might be written somewhere in the frosting. The reporter had quietly opened her notepad after all. David Ashworth, the foundation's chairman, set his glass down on the nearest table and looked directly at Emma. His voice was flat and careful, the tone of a man who had sat through decades of dishonest pitches. "Is any of this fabricated?" he asked her. Emma opened her mouth. "That's not," she started. "It's not what it looks like, the timing, the notes, it's not what you think it is." The words ran out somewhere in the middle of the sentence, and she didn't finish it. She closed her laptop bag, though nothing on the table beside her had needed closing. The small metallic click of the clasp was the loudest sound left in the room. The air conditioning hummed on overhead, indifferent, the only voice still willing to fill the space she'd left behind her. She left before the dessert course was served. Oliver stayed another 10 minutes, staring at a point on the floor that held no answers, before he left too, without telling anyone where he was going. Miriam found me near the coat check, twisting her bracelet around one wrist, her earlier sympathy for Emma nowhere on her face now. "I had no idea," she said. "I swear to you, Vivian, I had absolutely no idea any of that was staged. I just believed her, the way you believe anyone who cries at the right moment." "I didn't need you to know," I told her. "I needed you to check before you decided." She didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't wait for one. I collected my coat and my bag and left her standing there with her bracelet still turning between her fingers. She had something to sit with now on her own time. Bertram caught me at the door, his face still faintly stunned. He asked if I'd known this whole time, if I'd been planning that presentation for weeks. I told him the truth. I'd only known for a month. I'd only had the proof for 3 weeks. The rest of it, all those months before, I had simply lived through. The way you live through whether you don't yet understand is coming. He shook his head slowly. Remind me never to underestimate a woman who keeps a notebook, he said. There was something almost like respect in it, the kind that comes late but arrives sincerely. She came home 2 nights later. I was at the kitchen table when I heard the front door open. I heard her heels on the hardwood, slower than usual, like she was rehearsing something the whole walk-in from the car. She found me there with my notebook open in front of me, the leather cover soft under my palm. We can talk about this, she said. I can explain the context. It isn't what it looked like up there, I swear it isn't. I closed the notebook and didn't open my mouth. She turned toward the living room, where Oliver sat with his hands folded, elbows braced on his knees. He stared at the rug like it might finally offer him an opinion he could borrow. She's turned you against me, Emma told him. She's been building a case against me for weeks. This whole thing, all of it, it was planned. Can't you see that? Oliver didn't answer right away. He looked at Emma, then at me, then back at Emma. For a moment I watched him actually weigh it, the way he used to weigh 2 prices in a hardware store before deciding neither one was worth it. It would have been easier, I think, to believe her. Easier to split the blame down the middle and call it a marriage surviving its first hard year. Oliver looked at her slowly. His hand lay flat on his knee, still, no ring turning, no old habit to hide behind. Something in his face had gone tired in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager losing his father. Like something inside him had finally stopped fighting the truth. I went through every file after the gala, he said quietly. Every note. Every timestamp. Every outline. You kept notes on how to make my mother look evil. That's not something she built for you. That's something you wrote for yourself. He stood without raising his voice. He walked past her into the hallway and up the stairs. The sound of a door closing somewhere above us was quieter than I expected, almost gentle, the end of a very long-held breath finally let go. Emma stood alone in the living room for a long moment, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular. Then she came to find me one last time, her heels quiet now on the carpet. I reached into my coat pocket, where I had carried the thimble every day since that first strange morning I woke up in this borrowed life. I held it out to her, silver catching the low kitchen light. It was never about handling people with care, I told her. It was about handling the truth. You just handled it badly, from the very first page. She looked at the thimble the way you'd look at something that might still bite you. She didn't take it. She turned and walked out through the front door. A few minutes later I heard her car start in the driveway. Headlights swept once across the kitchen window, then the engine faded down the street and left the house entirely quiet. The weeks after that were quiet in a different way, not a house holding its breath, but something closer to actual rest. Oliver started coming down for breakfast again, the way he had as a boy. One morning, maybe 3 weeks later, he sat across from me turning his cup slowly without drinking from it. I should have checked, he said. Before any of it. I told him I understood why he hadn't. Believing the person crying in front of you costs nothing in the moment. It only costs something later, once the bill finally comes due. He nodded like that landed somewhere real. For a while we just sat there, 2 cups of coffee cooling between us. The tablecloth beneath them was a plain, undramatic blue, the one I'd bought to replace the white one that never fully came clean. I kept consulting for the foundation. Gwen and I started having lunch on Thursdays, that same green thermos always beside her plate, dented now on one side from a fall down her office stairs she refused to explain beyond a shrug and a laugh. I stopped trying to be whatever version of myself other people needed. Not the villain someone else had written for me. Not the endlessly patient peacemaker my son's marriage seemed to require. I became simply accurate. Nothing more than that, and nothing performed for anyone's benefit but my own. I moved the thimble from the sewing box to my desk, setting it down beside the foundation contract signed in that same Montblanc blue. It sits there now like a small, cold reminder that carefulness and coldness were never the same thing. It had once been convenient for someone else to blur the two together. I still keep the notebook, though it sits in a drawer now instead of my bag, mostly empty pages since that final week. Every so often I open it anyway, just to remember what it cost to stop explaining myself and start recording the truth instead. It cost less than I expected. It always does, once you finally decide to pay it. So I want to ask you this. If you discovered the villain in your favorite story was never the villain at all, who would you forgive first, the person who wrote the lie, or the person who spent years trapped inside it? Tell me what you think.